Rob Vanstone, Regina Leader-Post, joining us now. Rob, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing, Paul? Hi, Reed.
I'm always excited when we were talking about one of your articles last week, and it was fiery. It was about the CFL Global Draft, and I go, I like this guy's fire. We got to have him on the podcast. And then I reach out, and he goes, I would love to come on the podcast. I just heard you talk about my name on your podcast, and so that's always wonderful timing. So thank you for coming on.
Oh, it's been a great resource to kind of find out more about the XFL and more about the CFL, because a lot of the CFL reporting that's being done lately is been via your podcast, considering the array of guests that you've had on. And the Arash Madani session, I think, will go down as a classic if anything belongs in the all-time, if there's a podcast Hall of Fame, that one belongs in there already. And just a lot of people I know and a lot of people I respect, and I've really enjoyed listening to. In fact, Candy and I, she's laying on my lap right now. My foster dog Candy and I listened to most of your podcast with AJ Jakubek and with Dan Barnes while going for a walk around the neighborhood. Perfect. So it was a podcast and a podcast. So this is kind of quality humor you're going to be putting up with until you tell me to get lost.
That's okay.
All good. First and foremost, what are your thoughts about all this chatter about the potential of a merger?
It's interesting because part of it, I think, is really exciting and interesting. And part of it is terrifying. And maybe I'm showing my age by being a little terrified. But when you think of the reach that Danny Garcia and Dwayne Johnson and Redbird Capital have, and the resources they possess, and the followers, and just their whole vast network, and then you look at the CFL and the state that it's in, you think if there's a workable symbiosis here, what a lifeblood that could be for a league that really needs it. Back in 1996, 97, the league was in a situation maybe not quite as dire as it is now, but pretty close. And the National Football League intervened with an interest-free loan that basically kept the CFL going. And I don't think they're really that far off from that point now, where they need a benefactor to kind of come out of the blue. And maybe there's a potential here for the CFL to be sustained with some insight and support south of the border. And you just look at who they are and what they do, and it's really intriguing. At the same time, I'm old, and I grew up watching the Canadian Football League. I went to my first Saskatchewan Roughrider game in 1963. I was born in 1964. My mom was pregnant, and she was taking me to games, and so I've grown up with it and loved it. And my first sporting heroes were members of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. So for more than 50 years, I've just been all about it. So I'm not the demographic the Canadian Football League is after anymore, but it's just something I've loved. It's my first sporting love, and it's still my favorite thing in the world. So you start to hear talk and speculation about how you're tinkering with something that you really love, and it's kind of hard for traditionalists like me to grasp it sometimes. And I'm not really sure on what grounds I have for speculation. The Canadian Football League has left it so open-ended, beginning with their introductory media release, that they haven't discussed any of the issues pertinent to this partnership or whatever it might be. So you speculate, and you start kind of the snowball starts forming and building, but then you wonder, what is the foundation for all of this? Is this a legitimate fear? Just because this Canadian Football League hasn't come out and said we're going to preserve 3-down football, we're going to preserve Canadian rules, just because they haven't declared that, does that mean they're not going to? Or is this such an outrageous thing anyway? My visceral gut reaction right off the top when you talk about messing with the size of the field or the 3 downs or even the Rouge, I just kind of recoil a little bit, rightly or wrongly. I think that's my background, and a lot of my foundation is as a sports fan and now as a sports writer. So I really wrestle with it sometimes, and you're kind of balancing what does this league need to merely stay alive versus kind of the prototype of what the league has been and what old gargoyles like me wanted to continue being.
Yeah.
And sometimes those concepts, I'm not sure those concepts can really merge anymore.
You talked about you not being the target demographic, and we had Dan Ralph on here earlier, and he said the same thing, that he's no longer the target demographic. How do they grow the game to target and grab that demographic they want? We're saying the 18 pluses, the kids now, the Gen Zers that are growing up and becoming adults and buying things.
That's the real tug, and it's a different audience now than it was back in 1902 when I was 17 years old. I mean, my foundation in Regina following the Canadian Football League was we only had 2 TV stations here. And there was CBC and there was CTV. We didn't get American stations here until 1978. So the Rough Riders are everything. And there's Ron Lancaster and George Reed and these iconic players who were there year after year after year. There wasn't the player mobility that there is now. So it was, if you were living in Regina, Saskatchewan in the 70s or 80s and even in the 90s, I think you automatically just became part of that. They didn't really have to hunt for that demographic. When I was 5 or 6 years old, I was trading CFL football cards on the playground at Massey School, and everybody wanted the Ron Lancaster, and everybody wanted the George Reed, and I had 49 Ken Friths, right? And so they just roped us automatically. That's no longer the case, and the attention spans, I don't think, not just for young people, but for all people, are pretty fleeting now. So how do you get that younger group? And there's a bit of a conundrum here in that I think that in order to sustain the Canadian Football League, the wisest, or I think the most foundationally based strategy would be one interaction at a time. Get out there, talk to the kids, just make them love the game and expose them to it like they haven't really been exposed to it before. And there's a huge army of kids playing flag football, touch football, amateur football in Canada. They've already declared their interest in football. How do you get to them? But I think that's more of an incremental process than might need to take place here, because when you look at the financial situation, there's teams losing $7 million. There's talk of some losing as much as $15 million. The league losing $60 to $80 million, and it's never been a really profitable venture before. Even before that, you're trying to build brick by brick, but sometimes you just need the ready-made house, right? And so is that concept compatible? I think it's a wise way of doing it if you have the luxury of time. Just build your foundation, but maybe they just need something that, in order to stay alive, without seeing the numbers, maybe they just need a quick fix, or there's no other option. And that's more loose speculation because we haven't seen the books and we don't really know, but they haven't done a good job over the last few years, I think, targeting the demographic that they're now lamenting isn't there. And I think part of the issue they're going to face is that if they try to tinker too much to attract that young demographic that thinks that is really into a lot of the things that Danny Garcia and Redbird Capital and Dwayne Johnson are doing, if they target that demographic so closely that they're doing everything to try and adhere to that, do you lose the foundation of fans that, although it's an older demographic, it's still significant, and it is still it's what's kept the league going for a number of years. So how do you keep the older fans while attracting the younger ones? And you don't have the luxury of time, and you don't have a lot of resources to even throw into marketing or all these things that they need to do. In the meantime, you've got billionaires who have declared an interest in at least talking to the Canadian Football League. That was a really long answer. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So when we're talking about this XFL stuff, when we had Arash on, he said it's a Hail Mary. CFL is always looking for the Hail Mary. They're looking for the quick, the quick. I mean, is that how you view these XFL talks? Is it a Hail Mary? Is this, what the XFL is now, and whether reporters had watched it, a year and a half ago or not, people know now what it is. So do you think that, that is a worthwhile endeavor to go down, or do you view that as like that candy, the energy drink, kind of the quick fix?
My dog just raised her ears because her name is Candy. Thanks for the dog content. Isn't she a good girl? She's resting on my lap as we talk. That's the thing, because we don't know. I mean, they tell us it's a desperate situation, but we almost have to take their word for it. And I think there's certain markets that are more interested in the XFL than others. It stands to reason that Toronto, Montreal, BC, sort of desperation, really depressed situations in the Canadian Football League, and bigger cities in Canada. I think there's likely to be more of an interest in that, or a perception of that as the panacea. compared to, say, Saskatchewan, Winnipeg, where the interest is greater. And maybe it's harder for us in the West to relate to the plight of BC, Toronto, and Montreal, because we're so inured to the environment where football is big. But when you look at the devastation that has been wrought by COVID, the league's governors couldn't even muster up $30 million last year to play a truncated season, and they're might be facing a comparable situation this year. And the league's come out and acknowledged that there's been discussions. It might be a Hail Mary, but they're sure hoping that Roger Staubach can hit Drew Pearson for the touchdown against Minnesota. It might be that dire. And if so, to what degree do you have to adapt your game in order to just simply stay alive? And if so, what is left of the game? I wonder if there's, and I've been trying to wrestle with this one, and maybe you can provide me with greater insights, but is there a kind of a middle ground solution where both leagues can look at what the other one does well and extract things from it? The one thing the CFL has, despite its economic issues over the years, is longevity and tradition, and a fan base that has shown that it loves a game that isn't the National Football League. So you've got a bit of a target audience there. Maybe there's something that the XFL people can glean from the Canadian Football League simply by virtue of its longevity and its established roots. And what can the XFL get from that? Maybe there's some things. The NFL in a way succeeds in spite of itself. It's a tremendous game and people love it, and same with NCAA football. But you still look at some of the timing rules. You can walk off the field with 38 seconds left in the game, whereas there could be 2 lead changes in the Canadian Football League with 38 seconds left in a game, and the pre-snap motion and things like that. I think there's ways the American game can be improved by borrowing some Canadian rules. So could they jazz up the XFL game by taking the best of the Canadian Football League and incorporating it into what they do? Now, what does the Canadian Football League have to gain from the XFL? Certainly marketing expertise, certainly profile, and certainly money. But is it enough just to kind of pick really kind of a la carte from the salad bar, or do you need to just help yourself to a whole hunk of prime rib and take it to your table? My suspicion is the Canadian Football League is closer to the point where they just need to show up with wheelbarrows and take everything from the salad bar in order to just simply. That's a bad analogy, but I'm hungry. I'm not sure that kind of picking and choosing from the best of each is what they're looking for here, because the CFL is facing such a desperate situation, and the XFL is trying to prove that it can enjoy some longevity. I enjoyed what I saw of it in 2020. I really did. I love some of the things they did, especially with just the access and how close fans can get to the game and knowing what play is coming and things like that. I think you have to do that to get the attention of sports fans in general. You have to make it as interactive as you can. So again, is that something that both leagues can use to make their overall game more appealing by bringing fans right into the huddle, right into the dressing room, and kind of erasing all those lines all those barriers that are enforced by football people who are so just by nature militaristic and paranoid and guardians of the slightest morsel of information. That whole mindset would have to be changed. But if you can create a game on both sides of the border that is so fan friendly, maybe that can do it. But I think we're talking about tinkering when the imperative might well be something that requires an immediate infusion of cash. We don't yet know, and nobody's saying anything, so speculation runs wild, and my answers take up 48 minutes.
That's okay. So, sorry, my neighbor decided to bulldoze his driveway here in the middle of the interview, so I had to dump off for just a second there. This is what we get into, and you've covered this, and we try to talk with the experts that know what's going on, right? Because social media and stuff, and people know, we hear this. Well, the CFL doesn't need the help. They're not in the state, right? They're not. I mean, what is your perception of how dire or not things really are, without obviously seeing the books?
Yeah, and without seeing the books, and even if we did see the books, I'm not sure if they would tell the complete story. I think it's safe to say the teams are losing $7 or $8, $9 million, but some of them are owned by billionaires. So what the books wouldn't reveal is what is the tolerance for losses here. When you buy a CFL franchise, I don't think you're doing it with designs on making money, but how much are they willing to lose simply to say that they have this franchise? So I don't think the books would surprise us a lot, because we know that the situation is unavoidably dire, and the balance of power is held by teams, by owners that they decided they just don't want to operate as part of this model. Suddenly you're looking at a team the league that might be 6 or 7 teams, and then your total economic picture changes, because your television contract with TSM, which has been very good to them, changes, and you have to scale down the whole model. Dave Naylor put it really well. Dave Naylor from TSN, and he said it's a matter of do you get bigger or do you get smaller? And even not necessarily in terms of the amount of teams necessarily, but do you have to reduce your whole business plan and your expenses to the point where they're commensurate with the market? And the status quo is not going to suffice. And there's so many possible ramifications of that. But I think, I covered the CFL back in 1996, 97, and it feels a lot the same. I covered the Grey Cup in 1996 in Hamilton. And coincidentally, the Grey Cup's in Hamilton again this year, the Hamilton curse. And the whole preamble to that, the undercurrent to that entire Grey Cup week was, is this the last Grey Cup ever? And at the Saskatchewan Roughriders final home game of 1996, my angle for my column was, have we just seen the final Saskatchewan Roughriders game? And it wasn't a preposterous premise at the time. It sure seemed like it a decade later when they were hugely successful, but at the time nobody thought that it was beyond the realm of possibility that they wouldn't exist. Isn't that the discussion now? And now we're dealing with a variable like COVID. We know what it did to 2020, what it did to the XFL, what it did to the Canadian Football League, and we're still not sure what the effects are going to be in 2021. So, and how much of a tolerance is there for with the ownership in Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver? How much are they willing to put up with before they pull the pin? And if they do, what is left? The National Hockey League went with 6 teams for the longest time, and is sort of perceived to be the glory years in some cases. The original 6, there's kind of a luster to it, but I'm not sure that's gonna fly with Canadian football. I think it's come too far. I think the perception issue of a 6-team league would be a real impediment. And then what have you got left? So I think it is absolutely dire, because you're almost looking at these owners now and of the teams that are really struggling, and they've been such benevolent owners for the longest time, and they have absorbed some losses. Now you're asking far more of them than has ever been asked. And how much are they willing to withstand? Where is the pressure point where the bar just snaps? And if we're not there, I think we're very close.
Yeah, that, when they talk about, Toronto or Montreal kind of leading this charge with the XFL stuff. And yeah, I don't know if that CFL, if you pull those, bigger city teams down south, and then it's a prairie league with the 6 teams or whatever, that the CFL that remains, I just don't know. I've seen people make that argument, right? And it's like, well, I don't know. Is the money there for that? What's going on? With that, the last thing I did want to make sure that we touched on today is kind of your thoughts as we sit right now with the CFL this year, right? Because we get a lot of people like, we're tired of the mergers. We want to talk about this year. Obviously, you had talked about the global draft being kind of a waste of time. You're talking now. I had your headline: CFL finally ends silence, but uncertainty endures. The CFL has a multi-layered plan in place for a 2021 season, but still absent from the equation as an unequivocal commitment to play. So what are your thoughts going into now? We have the target date. What do we think?
The buzzword that you always hear from the teams is we're optimistic, et cetera, but that really isn't really that dissimilar to what we were hearing a year ago at this time. And we just don't know. And our COVID numbers here in Saskatchewan are worse than they were a year ago. And I mean, we're talking about the 3rd wave here in Canada, whereas in New York, they're opening everything up again, and you're seeing fans in the stands in the United States. We're still not anywhere close to that in Canada. So arguably the COVID situation is more of an impediment now than it was a year ago, despite the vaccination rollout that is taking place here. And that's what really makes me wonder. I think we've assumed right from the start that, okay, you can think in January when the vaccine talk really began, or when the layout of the schedule took place, that, okay, by the spring we should be fine. Well, now we're pushing May, and the numbers are terrifying. And I really don't see where there's going to be a huge change anytime soon. We just keep seeing the same numbers rolling out, even though more people are being vaccinated. There's still too many people dying, and there's hundreds of people suffering. So now here we are almost in May. Can we just, is it now a safe assumption that things will be okay by July or August? I'm not sure you can make that assumption anymore. And given that, there wasn't the will on the part of the teams to proceed with the season and pay for it themselves last year, even if it was a 6 games per team regular season starting in September in Winnipeg. And they didn't want to pay the $30 million themselves. Well, they may very well be facing the same scenario again this year. Yeah. If they didn't want to do it a year ago, would they want to do it this year? They've demonstrated in the past that there isn't that inclination. So despite everything that's been heard and everything that's been said, I'm becoming increasingly skeptical, because I just want to, what's the old saying? Talk is cheap, money buys whiskey. I want to see an actual unequivocal resolution to play. And that the press release that the CFL put out last week said there will be CFL football in 2021. Okay, good. But then as you kept reading further into it, it was that if this happens, if that happens, this qualifier, that qualifier, and then by the end, we're optimistic. Well, where is the complete unequivocal declaration that they're going to go ahead? And the further we go without hearing that, the more we have to wonder. And and simply, if they do play this year, it really doesn't necessarily address their financial situation. There'd be small crowds in the stands. Maybe for a gate-driven league, they'd lose some money either way. Do you want to get hit by a Volkswagen, or do you want to get hit by a truck? Either way, you're going to get hit by the vehicle. It's just a matter of scale. But are they willing to absorb or welcome that collision at all? They've proved last year that they weren't willing to. There may be more of an imperative this year, because 2 years out of circulation might be fatal. Yet, again, you put it in the XFL context, and they're mothballed for the time being, and they're trying to. One of the things that hurt the CFL when it expanded to the United States in '95 is that they did it too impulsively. And you can serve up, if you've got the money, you've got an expansion team, and oh, by the way, your first game's a month from now. And it's only a minor exaggeration. Yeah. And so because they didn't go into it with enough care and attention, that was ultimately injurious to the entire concept. So there may be an argument that, okay, if you're just going to proceed with a fragment of a season, maybe you just build it from the ground up and start from scratch and hope that 2022 is what 2021 hasn't been so far. And then there's sort of a conformity to the the XFL model, because they've mothballed it for a year. And maybe the timing of the alliance might work better if they're both trying to get themselves going at the same time. Because simply playing this year isn't going to be the salvation of the Canadian Football League. It would be nice, but it's not without cost. Yeah. And they're not in a position to absorb many costs. So I'm really, the longer we go, I'm really becoming skeptical and worried. I'd love to see it again. It's something I've loved since I was a kid, and something I'll always love. And I dearly miss it.
Good stuff. Very good insight from Rob Vanstone. We appreciate your time, and we appreciate you joining us here on the Markcast.
Well, thanks, Paul. Thanks, Reed. It's been a pleasure to chat with you, and I look forward to listening to the subsequent podcasts with my wonderful dog, Candy, who's also a fan.
We appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, we'll count 2 on your subscriber count for you and Candy. So thank you. We appreciate your time and the listenership as well. So thank you.
Thanks for your time. Have a great day.
And stay safe up there.
You too. Thank you so much.